in from around the world, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, where you're located, even if you want to tell us what you teach in the IB. Still watching folks come in. Great. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started with today's half-hour session. This is presented for free by IB Exchange. IB Exchange is a free platform for IB educators. There are thousands of resources to support your teaching on the platform. There are also communities where you can connect with peers and moderators, and we regularly put on free events like this one, so please follow our Zoom hub so you can stay informed about all those events. Today, I am joined by Amna Khan from Kialo EDU. She's the Education Resources Coordinator at Kialo, and Kialo is a platform designed to support critical thinking and civil discourse in classrooms. And Kialo was one of the exhibitors at our global conference in Budapest. So I'm excited to be able to bring some of that experience to all of you around the world. But without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Amna. And also, we are recording this session. It'll be available after the event. It'll post automatically to the Zoom lobby for this event, but we'll also post it on IB Exchange. So if you want to share it with your colleagues, it'll be really easy to do that. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Amna.
Thank you so much, Laura, and thank you all of you for being here. We're so excited to be, I'm so excited to be talking to all of you and hearing a little bit from you today as well. I've already got the title for the presentation up. I'm hoping you can all see my screen. Yeah. So let's just dive right in, honestly. So a quick introduction about myself. Laura's done a fairly substantial job of it, but I'm Amna. I work as an education resources coordinator at Kialo, which is the free online tool for smarter, more inclusive discussions. What that really honestly means is I work closely with teachers and curriculum designers to understand how to deliver on the promises and priorities of a modern education program. And the one that we're all here to talk about today happens to be one of the IB's cornerstone skills as well, and it's critical thinking. So in the IB, you guys all are aware of how important critical thinking is. You hear about it in the mission statement, in the learner's profile, in the subject guides that all of you receive as well, where the priority is always developing students who are critical thinkers, capable of appreciating, analyzing, and understanding diverse perspectives. It doesn't actually matter what subject area you teach. There's a way that critical thinking is going to be featured in it. So for our math teachers, you need critical thinking to evaluate problem solving approaches, assess models, decide the best method to solve a problem that you give your students. For our science teachers, you need help in formulating testable hypotheses, designing experiments, evaluating whether a result is valid or reliable. And I mean, language and literature are a bit more intuitive, but you can deconstruct text if you're a good critical thinker. You can analyze author intent, compare perspectives. So lots and lots of use cases. And today, what we're all going to be doing together is about three different things. We're going to talk about what critical thinking is, just simplify it a little bit as a concept, and why it matters. We're going to break down critical thinking into actionable components for MYP and DP students. And then we're going to discuss how you can develop these skills through structured strategies on Kialo. So on to the first thing, which is the definition. And with a lot of things, this bit's supposed to be easy, but with critical thinking, it comes with its challenges. Because it's one of those words that's mentioned very frequently and in very different and diverse contexts. So it's hard to know what exactly it is and how to, of course, go about teaching it in your classrooms. You hear of it from Socratic times, and it's just evolved over centuries to become a skill that's complex, layered, and nuanced. So I do want to flag that there's a lot of definitions out there, and the one that I've selected is one that sort of captures a lot of those different elements and also simplifies it, because that's really the purpose of this webinar today, to talk about critical thinking in a way that's accessible as opposed to overly complicated. So the definition that I've chosen to go with is the process of analyzing facts to form a balanced contextual judgment, which very much means thinking about thinking, and some of that metacognition that you hear a whole lot about today. And a more modern interpretation potentially is reasonable reflective thinking focused on deciding what to believe or do. But either way, it's one of those skills that's so important in the information age, right? And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the importance, even though, given that we're all here, we're very well aware of why critical thinking is important. But it's just good to align all of us to make sure we're on the same page and thinking similar things as we go into more and more of this information. So, very briefly, if you want well-rounded citizens who can actually combat misinformation, navigate echo chambers, verify the sources of the information that they're interacting with, critical thinking is super important. As far as career readiness goes, you see employers are consistently ranking critical thinking as one of their most sought after skills, just because it's seen as one of the most important drivers for innovative, solution-oriented thinking. Personal development, it's really important because reflection and adaptability are just essential skills if you're going to have any real meaningful connections with the people around you. So all in all, it's that critical thinking is not just an academic skill, it's a life skill. And it's one of those at those crucial intersections between what a teacher does and what you're supposed to do at home, because you're going to be inculcating these skills and it's going to go a very, very long way in ensuring the sort of people that your students eventually become. The problem, of course, is that as it's an important skill, it's not one that always comes with a handbook. And I'm going to be trying to actually do a little bit of, I'm going to be trying to break it down into a way where it feels a little bit like perhaps we've all got one. So what we were doing at Kialo is, right, we're very oriented with critical thinking. And one of the early problems we ran into was exactly this, that there's a lot of ways to approach and think about critical thinking. So we came up with a framework internally that we use as a reference point whenever we're guiding how we want students to be thinking or how we think students would benefit most from approaching different topic areas. And that's what the framework that you see in front of you is. A little bit of background about its creation. There's a lot of principles involved with critical thinking, and we chose to prioritize some of them. The first of which is empathy and collaboration. So engaging with others' opinions and arguments is an important facet of critical thinking. Then there's research and skepticism. So you have to know a lot of things, but you need to also question everyone and everything. Then there's perspective, so getting other people's perspective, but still remaining aware of what your own priorities are. And finally, there's contextual knowledge. So problems don't exist in isolation, but are often situational. And as the problem with principles often is, those are a little bit abstract. So the framework that you see in front of you is an attempt to ground things and make them a little bit more tangible and easy to follow. The one that you see right now is the one for the middle years program, where you see a certain number of steps that students can take when they're navigating new and big information. And it can often feel really intimidating when they're dealing with big subject areas like climate change or epidemics and pandemics. So what this framework does is it helps them take stock of the situation. It helps them retain information a little bit better because they're able to organize it in a way that's a little bit more sensible. So this is the stripped down version of the framework. It's fairly simple. It starts with something as basic as defining and understanding the problem statement. This one I think is personally a little bit, this one I think is personally considered more simple than it actually is, because often students have a little bit of problem understanding the mechanisms of a problem. And that's why they're not able to talk about or understand it as they move on with other steps. Then there's things like organizing impact. So for your students, they have to consider both the breadth and depth of the topic at hand. So who are the stakeholders? Are they applying pastel analysis? Are they organizing things along long and short-term impact? And then there's structuring arguments. So identifying premises, deriving related conclusions, avoiding fallacies, lots and lots of different things to go about as they're starting to sort out information and start to make sense of it. It does end with a conclusion, right? Where you need to then have an opinion at the end of having engaged with a lot of diverse and interesting content. So that's what the framework for the middle years program looks like. Let's see how the framework for the diploma program looks a little bit different. It also looks a little bit same, And that's because we've attempted to retain a bit of continuity between the middle years program framework and the diploma program framework, where both of these build upon one another and stem from one another, so that you can make sure that students, as they move between classes, are able to build on these skills and develop them to the point where they're much more mature. So for example, the first one for the middle years program was understanding the problem statement. Over here, you've got creating an evaluative framework that determines the direction of inquiry. So a little bit more complicated, it demands that students have a more nuanced understanding of what they're attempting to get out of information before they even get started with it. Similarly, where the middle years program had do your research, we've now got a literature review. And then you've also got more tools, right? Because at this point, you can expect your students to reflect and refine their own thoughts based on what other people are saying, based on the things that they're reading, and based on the feedback that they're getting from their teachers. Even the conclusion is a little bit different in that you're now assessing trade-offs and priorities. So you can have an opinion, but what is the opportunity cost or the cost or the other side thinking when you have that opinion? And that sort of nuanced gray area thinking, it's a little bit harder, but it's something that you can logically lead your students up to build onto. So we've now got steps, right? And they're a little bit generic because you want to be able to use this framework for different subject areas and different topics and different ideas and thoughts and situations. The question then becomes, how do you actually teach them? And broadly, before we even get into Kialo, it's important to know that there are a lot of different ways that you can. You've likely tried immersive and experiential learning already. So when you often one of the methodologies is just getting your students to try something out, so they can build personal empathy and learn how a situation works. A very common example of this is the immigration game, where students are asked to experience what it's like to be the other in a situation. But then the second kind of learning is vicarious learning, which takes a lot of different forms, but it often uses text and videos and things like case studies, dialogic education, peer learning, text analysis, and all of those different ways to get students to build on that empathy through secondhand learning. And Kialo combines a lot of those elements of vicarious learning in order to teach students how to argue, reason, reflect, and think critically about different things. What I'm going to do for you today is I'm going to add to the repertoire of resources that you already have and to your methodologies by giving you a really fun, directed, and easy way to teach critical thinking in your classroom. A tiny bit of background before I do that, though, about Kialo itself. So Kialo is a free online discussion tool. It's designed to get students to engage more critically, to develop their critical thinking skills. And our mission is really simple. It's to make the world a more thoughtful place. And it's a mission we've been striving to achieve since 2011. We've got over 1 million people using the platform today, and we've had very, very good and positive reviews from a lot of the people who have actually tested it out and found that the use cases are versatile and diverse and things that they actually benefit from quite immediately. I do want to flag we're foundation funded, and that means everything that I'm going to show you, the platform, the products, all of it are completely free of charge. So everything is going to be completely and wholly free. Having disclaimed that, I am going to dive into a little bit more about what Kialo and how Kialo is supporting critical thinking. Some of the theory before we get into the platform itself. And the most important promise that we make is of implicit skill building, which means a lot of different things, but primarily Kialo is built on research-based principles. So when building the platform, we very much had critical thinking in mind. So when you enter and use the platform, there's a number of key skills that your students are subconsciously picking up on just by virtue of using the platform. The research-based principles I'm talking about, I want to actually tell you about those so that it's not just all talk. The first of them is argument mapping, which is the visual representation of the structure of an argument. It often uses connecting lines to depict the logical relationship between each different step. There's a lot of empirical studies out there that show you it's one of the most effective ways of teaching students critical thinking. It can improve self-reflective judgment. It's been observed to improve the student's ability to construct, analyze, and evaluate arguments. On top of that, our format also aligns very much with the conventions of formal debating. So a lot of researchers out there have shown how formal debating is really great because it helps because it allows for a thorough exploration of arguments, the spontaneous articulation of ideas, and it's really great in getting students engaging with one another. Then there's inquiry-based learning. About everything on Kialo is based on the idea that you have to explore thoughts and questions in a way that's structured. And finally, there's empathy and collaboration, because nothing can happen in a vacuum. One of the important elements of Kialo is just making sure that your students are interacting with one another and that they're learning from one another as a consequence, as well as from you. So all of this to say, the more you use the platform, regardless of the content area of which you're operating in, the more consistently you're going to be able to hone some of these essential skills that I've already talked about. You can do a little bit more explicit skill building as well, but that really does depend. That one's more for if you're actually teaching a topic like TOK or extended essay writing. So, but I don't want to focus on that. What I'm going to show you today is the platform itself and how it helps you build some of the skills I've discussed. On the screen, I've got a QR code displayed. If you have your phones on you, you're very welcome to just scan and enter the discussion that I'm going to be showing you yourselves. I'll give you guys a few seconds as you do this. One of the things as you do this, I should just flag. If you're setting up a discussion on Kialo, this is how easy it is to get your students to join these as well. You can just have them enter the discussion by scanning the QR code. For those of you who are opting to join it as well, you'll notice that the platform doesn't ask you to enter your names. Instead, what it's doing is it's assigning you a name. And it could be something like purple elephant or blue dolphin. And that's because we've got the anonymous mode enabled, just because we feel like that protects a little bit from ad hominems and gets students focused on what people are saying as opposed to who is saying them. So what I'm going to do now, and you should be able to see my screen. Oh, I see there's already a lot of comments. That's really nice. Okay, great. I do like that everyone's getting involved. So when you enter a discussion, this is what the layout looks like. And as you can see over here, it all starts with a central thesis statement. And that's the main topic statement upon which the entirety of the discussion is based. When you enter a discussion, that's the only thing you can have on there. Everything else in its entirety is student created and student developed, which means that your students go in and they add these pros and they add these cons. Now, I'd like you to remember for a second the framework that we discussed earlier, right? We talked about a couple of things, and one of them was understanding and defining the problem statement. Now, over here, your teacher's done that already for your students, but you're getting them to interact with some of those things. And then as far as the top level claims go, what you've got is your students creating that evaluative framework that we talked about. They're sitting down and they're determining what the distinct arguments are, what the broad areas of impact are, and they've got a little sense of organization that they ordinarily just wouldn't. Things continue to get interesting though. We've not just got a flat layout. It's not just a sticky note sort of format. What we've got is that each of these pros and cons has its own set of pros and cons. And that's really, really useful as an exercise, because now what you see is a lot of arguments that are connected to one another, which means that logic has been broken down into discrete elements, and students are able to create a big, interesting, complicated argument in a step-by-step and really, really simple process. Now, that's sort of the argument mapping that I was talking about earlier as well, right? So where you basically got logical lines connecting different parts of an argument. So that's another set of the criteria that we discussed earlier already being met. You've got a logical structure of each of these arguments. And for our older students, what you've got is analytical inferences as well as sourcing taking place. So your students have to go out and do their research. And each of these claims can actually have a source added to them, where students are extra diligent. They can even go the extra mile and include quotes alongside any of these sources where your students are doing literature reviews, where they're gathering argumentation on a basic level, what you have is a sidebar where you can actually see every single one of the sources, including in the discussion. So it's a really great exercise in ensuring that your students are, one, just doing their research, but two, that the research that they do is extremely high quality and easy, and it's an easy way for you to assess the sort of sources that they're looking at. So if you don't want your students using Wikipedia, very, very easy way for you to catch that in just a few seconds. Now we're going to go another step further, right? And talk about another way in which you can actually observe the development of arguments and ideas and thoughts. And that's the sunburst over here, where we've actually had a significant number of contributions. So that's why it looks a little bit like this. But what you see here is how the entire discussion has developed. And you'd be able to see right at the onset that this was a little bit top heavy. So you've had a lot of people add claims right at the top of the discussion. But if you go in, you can also see that there are certain ones that are developed in depth. And that's generally what you'd encourage your students to do as well, to go in and dig into their reasoning and develop ideas and thoughts as much as they can and as explicitly as they can. So Sunburst is a great way to keep track of some of that basic information. Finally, some of the other criteria that we talked about in the framework as well, right? One of which was exploring different perspectives. And I think that's a whole lot of fun on Kialo because none of these things are happening alone. Even right now, as you guys are all interacting here, what you see is people can actually go in and respond to other people's ideas. All you have to do is click and say why someone's wrong. And students absolutely love that because they have a really easy time going in, honing in on what someone is actually saying, and then responding to it. So a lot of that collaborativeness is built in. It doesn't always have to be antagonistic. You can go in and you can support an idea someone is saying with a supporting example, a supporting source, a supporting thought. And that goes a really long way in making sure that your students are, talking to each other and having a good time with what they're trying to do and simultaneously learning and exploring. It's not just students who are going to be leaving this feedback of this form. Your teachers are also obviously going to be able to do the same thing. And there's a couple of different ways in which they can do so. So the first is the grading and feedback feature, which allows teachers to actually say what it is that they feel about a student's claim or the quality of the claim that they leave behind. So right now we've got a lot of different people over here. So you can see a full list of your students as well as any claims that they may have made. And you can leave them overall feedback and overall grades as well for their discussion. However, if you want to go in and grade a specific claim, you go in here, and I think this is a pretty great claim. It's got a really nice source to it. It seems like the student's responding to the argument above. So I'm going to give it a 5, and I'm going to leave them feedback by saying, great job adding a source. It would be nice to have another example. So I hit save. And then what happens is that this student gets a notification saying that they can review their grade, review their feedback. And that's also really important for the thought refinement process within the framework that we discussed earlier. Just the idea that you're not just talking to yourself, you are talking to actual people, you are getting directed and useful and relevant feedback. And then as a consequence, you're refining your thoughts and the way that you're saying things and your articulation. So where you have perhaps students who are learning or picking up on a new language, this is a really great way to make some of that more cohesive thought process be articulated. There's one last real question really here that I want to answer for you, which hasn't been asked, but it often is. It's that how do you make sure that your students are actually doing what we want them to be doing, right? Because it can look a little bit intimidating when you go in. And this is something a lot of you are actually going to have experience since you've made claims. And that's the tasks feature, where you're able to set students with a certain number of tasks that they have to perform within the discussion. And every time they perform it, they get a little celebration or a notification saying that they've accomplished their task. And in doing so, they also have a bit of direction going into the discussion. So what is the base threshold that your students have to meet? In no way is that a cap on the number of contributions they can make. It just ensures a certain degree of participation, which is so important and so nice to have for our more shy students who may not necessarily speak up as much as some of the more confident ones. So that's the first way. The second thing is the background info. And that's really, it's a really nice way to just take a look at the discussion. I've opened the incorrect thing over here. Yeah, so what it does is it lets teachers set a certain number of, provide a summary of the discussion or give a little bit of information that you want your students to be taking a look at, a certain amount of information that you want your students to be thinking about as they actually enter the discussion. It can also just be a series of sources and articles that you want them to read or a set of instructions that you want them to follow. So far, there's a lot of different utilities that come from this, right? And one of the big benefits of Kialo is that it's able to provide a very structured way of going about the entire discussion. And at the end of it, you're able to take a look and you're able to see how everybody has contributed and the nature of their contributions. So very, very simple, very easy to follow. I mean, over here, as you can see, like this is a great example. We have two different people who have now contributed to each other's ideas, and they've been able to do so with limited to no instruction and talk through. So those are the two things that I wanted you guys to keep in mind. Um, I will actually pause for questions before going back to the slides if anybody has one.
So
If not, oh yeah,
yeah, a
go
couple
ahead.
of questions. I'm just looking at the Q&A tab, and feel free to put things in the question and answer tab on your Zoom taskbar. You can also raise your hand if you have a question. One question from Mita was just generally like, are there specific connections to PYP? She wondered if we'd be looking at PYP connections and
Oh,
ways to use the platform.
so but not for this presentation, no. However, PYP is one of those things that we are developing resources for. Because it's a younger age group, we've had teachers who do find it very interesting as a very safe and easy way to get students, started using technology and becoming more comfortable with it. But I don't necessarily have something as, formalized as we do for MYP and DP.
Yeah, and maybe we can do a future session as that's being developed. We do have monthly sessions, events for PYP on the Zoom hub for IB Exchange. Another question was just about leveraging the power of AI. Any connections to AI in the way the Kialo platform works?
So no, we don't use AI. All of this has to be created by your students. The idea there is, right, there are so many AI tools already. This is about learning to repackage information in a way that's actually relevant to the discussion that students are having. We think it's developing that skill, and AI doesn't necessarily supplement that.
Yeah. One question from Latha. Kialo allows many entries for students. Is there a control? So I'm guessing that means like, is there a way to sort of limit or like sort of cap the number of entries or require a certain amount of entries?
So you can require, like from the task feature, you can keep track of how many entries that someone's making. And you can also just honestly, if someone's spamming the debate, you'll be able to get a good sense of that as well as the info feature. So over here, you've got, the info. So you can actually see each of the claims, contributions, votes, tasks that a student has made. What I will say is the only person who can enter a discussion is the people that you allow to enter. So these are not open for the public to see. I sent you guys an invite link through the QR code, which is why you were able to actually enter the discussion and, see what was happening.
Question from Kate, is there a way to embed a text that they respond to? So I guess like have a starting point where there's a text they're looking at and then the discussion flows under it.
Yeah, so you would need to embed the text in, say, the background info, or you can add a link over here that sends people to that particular claim. So if I click edit over here, what I would be able to do is I'd be able to embed a link that perhaps directs people to the source that you want them to go to. Alternatively, with the background info, you can also just add something over here that you want your students to read through.
Antoinette asks, is there a way to extract a student's contribution? For example, if you wanted to use this as an assessment?
Oh, I mean, yes. So the grading and feedback tool is pretty great for that exact purpose, right? what you can do with it is you'd be able to click onto any one student, and you'd be able to, give them feedback, and you'd also be able to see all of the claims that they've added. So this particular person hasn't added any, but all right, so we've got a couple of examples over here. So you'd be able to get like a good summary of everything that they've done.
And then Payal asks how useful this would be for extended essay. Off the top of my head, I could see this for like research question formulation and
Yeah.
source analysis. I mean, I could see lots of different ways to make that a more collaborative process. But if you wanted to add some extended essay specific things.
I mean, I think it's actually fabulous for a precursor to essay writing, right? Like you've got that convenient pro-con structure, the claim counterclaim structure, right? Which you want for all your students to have in the essay. And what it also does is often what happens with students is they add so much description to their essays that they don't actually get to making their point. So with this, you can actually hone in on the argument itself and what they're trying to push forward. And it goes a long way in just making sure that the final essay is higher quality.
Then we have Halani asking if you could talk about maybe applications or ways to use it for language acquisition for MYP students.
That's actually a really interesting question. So we've had a lot of success using this as for, especially for people who are trying to learn another language or a second language, particularly English. And that's because a lot of what becomes a big impediment when you're learning a language is the ability to actually converse and talk and find ways to express yourself. And within Kialo, if you were to pick, something, a simple discussion or one of those more fun ones, like are ghosts real? What that does is it gets students drawing on vocabulary and saying things in a more interesting or a more personalized way. And that goes a long way in their long language acquisition abilities.
And then we've had a lot of folks ask about access to the recording of this session and then also the slides. I'm definitely going to be sharing the recording. You should get an automated email from Zoom, but then we also do follow-up emails with the link to the recording and the resources shared. If it's okay with Amna, we'll share the slides. And then also we'll be posting it. It'll post to the Zoom platform, and then it'll also be posting to IB Exchange.
I'm completely fine with me, yes.
Okay, cool. And then somebody asked if this can screen for inappropriate language. So you mentioned like if people are spamming the chat, but also if they're using maybe inappropriate or not following like the guidelines for interaction with the community.
Ah,
So it
so
screen.
so that was a bit of a balancing act for us, right? Because we're working with students, we don't want access. We don't want to see what they're writing, and we're very, very mindful of privacy as a consequence. So because we didn't want to integrate anything that could potentially infringe on anybody's data, we don't have that. We do rely on teachers to moderate the actual content that's being developed within the discussion.
Yeah, and we had a question about whether this can be used for TOK, and I think that's like to me that was the first obvious
Yeah.
connection, but I don't know if you wanted to like do a quick description of that.
Actually, if I'll take a couple of other questions right after I go over one of the
Yeah,
last
sure.
slides that I
Mhm.
had over here, which was just honestly next step. So I did want to talk about what you guys can expect from us as a company. So if you're interested in seeing more or knowing more about Kialo, there's a number of things that I can offer you. The first is pre-made discussions, like the discussion that we just saw, which already has a lesson plan built into it. The second is a series of lesson plans. We've already got something for an intro to critical thinking activity that you can test out with your students, get a sense of how much they enjoy it, how well they work with the platform. We've got a lot of really useful blog posts as well that can also take you through certain things and activities you can try with your students. And finally, because it relates quite well with the TOK question, we've got a TOK pilot in the works right now. What we're doing is we're providing baseline resources to teachers as they navigate the landscape that is TOK. We know it's very tricky, and what we're attempting to do is give them some of those activities that help them get started with each of the different categories or area or subject areas within TOK. So if that's something you're interested in, please feel free to drop me an email. after this presentation, I'll absolutely get back to you. And for those of you who don't are not teaching T, okay, we've also got demos, so we can talk you through how you can use the platform. We're very happy to offer those to any schools, any teachers, anyone really who's interested. And we give you a sense of, how the platform would work exactly. And if you want help integrating it within any LMSs you have, then I'd be able to answer those questions for you on an individual basis as well.
Great, yes, and we're
All
at
right.
time, and I think yeah, a lot of the questions are just people sort of asking for that, like relevant to their what they're doing in their classroom today or tomorrow. So I think those are great
Mhm.
opportunities to try it out. We'll follow up and share the documents and the recording. Thank you so much, Amna. This was such a cool demo. I'm glad that we got to reconnect after the global conference. Please feel free to connect with Amna and to try out Kialo on your own. But otherwise, we'll close the session and say thank you and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Amna. It was great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Muchas
you very much.
gracias,
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you and God bless you.
Thank you, Amin.
Gracias. Thank you all.
Thank you so
Nice talk about
much.
this.
Thank you.
More sharing.
منصور
arigatou gozaimasu.
محمد منصور
Thank
Saludos,
you.
comments. Saludos, Hannah.
ده